The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Joseph Stewart stared at the email that would change everything. 3 lines. 72 hours before his $88,000 performance bonus was set to vest. His coffee grew cold as the words burned into his retinas. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The Nexus Technologies office buzzed around him, oblivious to the atomic bomb that had just detonated in Joseph's cubicle. Sarah from accounting walked by with her usual morning smile, unaware that the man she'd shared elevator small talk with for 3 years was now persona non grata. The irony wasn't lost on Joseph. He'd helped design the very security protocols that would soon march him past his colleagues like a common criminal. His fingers trembled as he minimized the email, muscle memory opening his patent portfolio folder. 23 pending applications, 11 approved patents, all filed during his tenure at Nexus, all bearing his name as primary inventor, all assigned to the company that had just discarded him like expired milk. The folder represented 5 years of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners, and sacrificed relationships, all for a company that had deemed him redundant 72 hours too early. His phone buzzed, a text from his girlfriend Emma. "Still on for dinner tonight? Been looking forward to celebrating your bonus." The cruel timing made his stomach churn. He'd already made reservations at La Bernardine, already picked out the Cartier ring hidden in his desk drawer, the one he'd planned to pay for with bonus money that would never come. The security guard's reflection appeared in Joseph's monitor before he heard the footsteps. "Mr. Stewart, I'm going to need you to pack up your personal items." The man's voice carried professional detachment, but his eyes held a flicker of sympathy. Even corporate muscle recognized injustice when they saw it. As Joseph mechanically gathered his belongings, a succulent plant his sister had given him, an MIT engineering mug, 3 patents framed on his wall, his mind raced through the legal landscape he knew better than anyone. Nexus had made a critical error. They'd terminated him for performance issues, but his file contained nothing but stellar reviews. More importantly, they'd violated their own intellectual property protocols by cutting him loose before his contractual obligations expired. The cardboard box felt heavier with each personal item, 5 years of innovation reduced to a few photographs and a stress ball shaped like a molecular structure. His colleagues watched from behind their monitors, some offering awkward waves, others pretending intense fascination with their spreadsheets. The walk to the elevator felt like a perp walk, each step echoing in the sudden silence that follows corporate executions. In the lobby, Joseph paused beside the glass display case showcasing Nexus Technologies' crown jewels, their breakthrough innovations that had made them the darling of Silicon Valley. The centerpiece was the NX7 processor architecture, a marvel of efficiency that had revolutionized mobile computing. Joseph's signature was etched in the patent filing, though his name had been conspicuously absent from the press releases announcing the $2.3 billion licensing deal with Samsung. "Sir, I need to escort you to your vehicle," the security guard prompted gently. Joseph nodded, taking one last look at his intellectual children displayed like trophies in a case he'd never see again. The automatic doors whispered shut behind him, sealing his fate and crystallizing his resolve. Sitting in his Honda Accord in the parking garage, Joseph did something he'd never done in his professional career. He researched his own patents from a legal vulnerability perspective. His background as both an engineer and reluctant student of intellectual property law during his MIT graduate program had given him a unique understanding of the system's pressure points. What he discovered in the next 30 minutes would either restore his faith in justice or destroy a company worth $4.8 billion. The first crack in Nexus's armor appeared in patent US 10-847392, the foundational architecture for their revolutionary compression algorithm. The assignment paperwork contained a critical flaw. It had never been properly executed. Joseph's signature was there, but the company's authorized representative had signed as CTO rather than his actual name, invalidating the transfer under California intellectual property law. A rookie mistake buried in bureaucracy, invisible to everyone except someone who understood both the engineering and legal sides of innovation. But this was just the beginning. As Joseph dug deeper, cross-referencing filing dates with employment contracts and examining the chain of title for each patent, a pattern emerged. Nexus had built their entire product ecosystem on intellectual property that legally belonged to him. Patents they'd assumed were theirs, but had never properly acquired due to systematic clerical errors in their legal department. His phone rang. Emma's face smiled from the screen, her excitement palpable even in a still image. Joseph declined the call, knowing he couldn't fake normalcy while plotting the corporate equivalent of thermonuclear warfare. The ring in his desk drawer would have to wait. Tonight was about survival. Tomorrow would be about justice. Joseph spent the next 72 hours in a caffeine-fueled legal deep dive that would have impressed his intellectual property law professor from MIT. His studio apartment was transformed into a war room, patent documents spread across every surface, timelines mapped on the walls, and a whiteboard covered in corporate structure diagrams that looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. The deeper he dug, the more systematic the negligence appeared. Nexus Technologies had grown so rapidly that their legal department had cut corners on intellectual property assignments, treating them as routine paperwork rather than the foundational documents they represented. Somewhere between their Series B funding and IPO, they'd developed a fatal case of hubris, assuming their engineers were too grateful and too intimidated to ever challenge the system. Emma found him at 3 a.m. on the second night, surrounded by empty coffee cups and Chinese takeout containers, her laptop screen casting an eerie glow across patent application after patent application. "Joseph, what happened to dinner? You've been radio silent for 2 days." Her concern was genuine, but Joseph couldn't explain that he was potentially holding the legal equivalent of a nuclear weapon. "I got fired," he said simply, not looking up from a particularly damning assignment document that bore only his signature. 72 hours before my bonus vested. They escorted me out like I had embezzled money. The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. 5 years of loyalty, reduced to a security escort and a cardboard box. Emma sat beside him on the couch, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she assessed his mental state. "I'm sorry, baby, but maybe this is a blessing. You've been talking about starting your own company for years." She picked up one of the patent documents, studying the technical diagrams with the same focus she applied to medical charts. "What are all these?" "My life's work. Every innovation I created at Nexus. Every breakthrough that made them billions. And apparently, they never bothered to legally acquire most of them." He pointed to the signature lines, explaining the technical defects that had voided the assignments. Emma's expression shifted from concern to understanding to something approaching awe. The third patent Joseph examined, US 1123847 for adaptive network protocols, revealed the most egregious oversight. The document had been backdated to appear as though it was signed during Joseph's employment, but the digital timestamp embedded in the PDF metadata showed it had been created 6 months after the filing date. Someone in Nexus's legal department had tried to forge the assignment retroactively, creating ironclad evidence of fraud. Joseph's phone buzzed with LinkedIn notifications, former colleagues expressing sympathy for his departure, headhunters sensing opportunity, and academic contacts offering guest lecturer positions. The outpouring of support was touching, but it also revealed how widely news of his termination had spread. Nexus had made his dismissal public before he'd even processed it privately. By Thursday morning, Joseph had cataloged 14 patents with defective assignments and documented systematic patterns that suggested intentional negligence rather than mere oversight. The monetary value represented by these intellectual property rights exceeded $3.2 billion in licensing revenue, money that Nexus had collected based on patents they never legally owned. His sister called while he was deep in a particularly complex filing timeline. "Mom's worried about you. She saw something online about Nexus laying off engineers." Sarah's voice carried the protective tone she'd used since they were children, when she'd defended him from playground bullies who picked on the quiet kid who preferred books to sports. "It wasn't a layoff," Joseph explained, switching to speakerphone while he continued examining patent claims. "They terminated me specifically 3 days before my performance bonus. But I think they made a mistake. A big one." He outlined his discoveries, watching Sarah's expression change through their video call as she grasped the implications. "Joseph, this sounds dangerous. These are powerful people with expensive lawyers. Maybe you should just file for unemployment and find another job." Sarah's concern was valid, but it assumed that powerful people with expensive lawyers were somehow immune to the fundamental mechanics of intellectual property law. The breakthrough came on Thursday evening, while Joseph was cross-referencing patent prosecution histories with employment records. Patent US 109562221, the core technology behind Nexus's flagship NX7 processor, had been filed under emergency petition while Joseph was technically on unpaid medical leave following his father's funeral. The assignment document bore his signature, but California law clearly stated that employees on unpaid leave couldn't be compelled to assign inventions as work for hire. Joseph leaned back in his desk chair, staring at the smoking gun that could potentially unravel Nexus Technologies' entire product portfolio. The NX7 processor wasn't just successful, it was the foundation of their licensing empire, the technology that had transformed them from a promising startup into a Silicon Valley juggernaut. And legally, it belonged to him. Emma emerged from the shower to find Joseph staring at his laptop screen with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not excitement, but the cold calculation of someone who just realized they held all the cards in a game they hadn't known they were playing. Friday morning marked exactly 72 hours since Joseph's termination, the moment his $88,000 bonus would have vested. Instead of celebrating, he sat in the waiting room of Patterson & Associates, the most feared intellectual property litigation firm on the West Coast. Rebecca Patterson herself had agreed to an emergency consultation after Joseph's late-night email outlining his discoveries. "Mr. Stewart, I've reviewed your preliminary analysis," Patterson said as they settled into her corner office overlooking San Francisco Bay. Her reputation as a patent litigator was legendary. She'd successfully defended against Google in 3 separate cases and had personally cost Apple $847 million in judgment awards. "What you've uncovered isn't just negligence, it's a systematic pattern that could constitute fraud." Joseph spread his documentation across Patterson's conference table like a general planning an invasion. Each patent file was meticulously organized, with defective assignments highlighted and supporting evidence cross-referenced. The presentation took 37 minutes, during which Patterson's expression evolved from professional skepticism to genuine amazement. "The beauty of intellectual property law," Patterson explained as she examined the forged timestamp evidence, "is that ownership isn't negotiable. Either you own a patent or you don't. There's no middle ground, no gray area for corporate lawyers to exploit." She turned to her computer, pulling up Nexus Technologies' latest quarterly filing. According to their SEC documents, 83% of their revenue comes from licensing intellectual property. If that intellectual property doesn't belong to them— Joseph nodded grimly. "Their entire business model collapses. Every licensing deal becomes a breach of contract. Every product incorporating the disputed patents becomes potential grounds for injunctive relief." The legal implications were staggering. Not just monetary damages, but the complete shutdown of Nexus's operations until ownership could be resolved. Patterson's colleague David Kim joined the meeting with additional research. "I've been examining Nexus's patent prosecution history since your call last night. The pattern extends beyond assignment defects. They've been filing continuation applications on your original patents, essentially creating derivative patents without your consent. Under current law, those derivative patents are invalid if the base patents weren't properly assigned." The room fell silent as the full scope of Nexus's vulnerability became clear. They hadn't just failed to acquire Joseph's original patents, they'd built an entire intellectual property empire on that faulty foundation, with each subsequent filing compounding the legal defects. It was corporate law's equivalent of building a skyscraper on quicksand. "What are your objectives?" Patterson asked directly. "Do you want monetary compensation, equity in the company, or are you looking to prove a point?" Her question cut to the heart of Joseph's motivations. Was this about justice, revenge, or simple financial recovery? Joseph considered his response carefully. The engineer in him wanted elegant solutions to complex problems. The human being in him wanted acknowledgement that 5 years of his life had value beyond a security escort and a cardboard box. "I want them to understand that people aren't disposable," he said finally, "and I want what was promised to me, compensation for my contributions to their success." Patterson outlined 3 potential strategies. The conservative approach involved private negotiations, seeking monetary settlement while allowing Nexus to quietly correct their intellectual property defects. The moderate approach included filing formal patent ownership challenges, forcing public acknowledgement of the disputed claims. The aggressive approach, which Patterson seemed to favor, involved seeking immediate injunctive relief against Nexus's entire product line until ownership could be legally established. "The nuclear option," Kim added with a slight smile, "involves notifying their licensing partners that they may have been paying royalties for patents that Nexus never owned. Samsung, Apple, Microsoft, they don't appreciate legal uncertainty when they're paying billions in licensing fees." Joseph's phone buzzed with a text from his former manager. "Hey Joseph, heard about the termination. Really sorry. It came from above my pay grade. Hope you land on your feet." The message perfectly encapsulated corporate culture's casual cruelty, expressing sympathy while accepting no responsibility for decisions that destroyed lives. By the end of the meeting, Joseph had retained Patterson and Associates on a contingency basis. They would file formal patent ownership challenges within the week, seeking recognition of Joseph's rights to 14 disputed patents worth an estimated $3.2 billion in licensing revenue. The legal fees alone would exceed $2 million, but Patterson was confident enough in the case to gamble her firm's resources. "One more thing," Patterson said as Joseph prepared to leave. "Once we file these challenges, there's no going back. Nexus will throw everything they have at you: private investigators, character assassination, legal harassment. They'll try to break you financially and emotionally before the case ever reaches trial." Her warning was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd seen corporate warfare at its ugliest. Joseph thought about his empty desk drawer, the Cartier ring he couldn't afford, and the girlfriend who deserved better than a man obsessed with revenge. Then he remembered the display case in Nexus's lobby, showcasing innovations that bore his signature, but not his name. "Let them try," he said quietly. "I've got nothing left to lose." That evening, Joseph called Emma to explain why dinner would have to wait indefinitely. Her response surprised him. "I've been thinking about what you showed me, those patents, the way they treated you. It's not just about money, is it? It's about respect for the work you do, recognition that innovation has value beyond quarterly earnings." As Joseph reviewed the legal documents one final time before signing, he realized that Emma understood something his former employers never had, that behind every patent application was a human being whose creativity and dedication deserved more than a security escort and a cardboard box. Tomorrow, Nexus Technologies will learn that some engineers fight back. The earthquake hit Nexus Technologies at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a routine legal filing. Joseph watched from his apartment as Patterson's team simultaneously submitted 14 patent ownership challenges to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, each one meticulously documenting the chain of title defects that invalidated Nexus's claims to his intellectual property. Within hours, the aftershocks began rippling through Silicon Valley. Nexus stock price dropped 12% in pre-market trading as algorithmic systems detected the patent challenges and automatically flagged the company as high legal risk. By noon, trading had been suspended pending clarification of the intellectual property disputes. Joseph's laptop refreshed obsessively, displaying news feeds that transformed from routine tech coverage to crisis reporting in real time. Nexus Technologies faces patent challenge that could invalidate entire product line, read the TechCrunch headline. Bloomberg went further. Former engineer claims ownership of patents worth $3.2 billion to Nexus Technologies. Emma arrived at his apartment carrying coffee and bagels, finding Joseph in what had become his permanent workstation. Laptop open, documents scattered, phone buzzing with calls from reporters he hadn't yet decided whether to answer. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling beside him on the couch that had become his command center. "Honestly, I'm terrified," Joseph admitted, watching Nexus's stock price continue its downward trajectory. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a fever dream." The magnitude of what he'd set in motion was beginning to sink in. He wasn't just challenging a former employer, he was potentially dismantling a $4.8 billion company. The first counterattack came at 2:15 p.m. in the form of a cease and desist letter delivered by emergency courier. Nexus's legal team, led by the prestigious firm of Morrison & Forster, demanded that Joseph immediately withdraw his patent challenges and publicly retract any claims of ownership. The letter was signed by Marcus Chen, Nexus's general counsel, whom Joseph remembered as the affable lawyer who'd conducted his initial patent assignment briefings. "They're scared," Patterson confirmed during their afternoon conference call. "The cease and desist is legally meaningless. You can't intimidate someone into abandoning legitimate patent rights, but it tells us they understand the severity of their position." Her voice carried the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered dangerous prey. By evening, Joseph's story had metastasized across social media. #PatentTroll began trending on Twitter, though the sentiment was surprisingly divided. Half the comments painted Joseph as a disgruntled employee seeking undeserved windfall. The other half viewed him as David facing a corporate Goliath. The nuanced reality, an engineer asserting legitimate legal rights, was lost in the polarization. The human cost became apparent when Joseph's former colleague Lisa Chen called, her voice tight with stress. "Joseph, they're telling us the company might shut down if your lawsuit succeeds. People are panicking about their jobs, their stock options, their families. I know you're angry, but innocent people are going to get hurt." The conversation haunted Joseph as he stared at his reflection in his apartment window. Lisa was right. Nexus employed 847 people, most of them hard-working engineers and support staff who'd had nothing to do with his termination. His quest for justice was becoming a weapon of mass destruction, capable of obliterating livelihoods and dreams far beyond the executives who'd wronged him. Emma found him on his apartment balcony at midnight, staring at the city lights below. "Having second thoughts?" she asked gently, wrapping her arms around him from behind. The warmth of her embrace contrasted sharply with the cold calculation that had driven him for the past week. "Every minute," Joseph replied honestly. "But then I remembered that they fired me to avoid paying a bonus they legally owed them. They built their empire on work they stole from me and dozens of other engineers. At what point does seeking justice become indistinguishable from seeking revenge?" Wednesday morning brought news that forced Joseph's hand decisively. Nexus had filed a countersuit alleging that Joseph had violated his confidentiality agreement by discussing proprietary technologies with Patterson's firm. They sought $50 million in damages and injunctive relief, preventing him from further corporate espionage activities. The filing was accompanied by a press release portraying Joseph as a disloyal employee attempting to destroy a successful company out of personal spite. "They just made a tactical error," Patterson explained during their emergency meeting. "By filing a frivolous countersuit, they've opened themselves to sanctions under federal anti-SLAPP statutes. More importantly, they've confirmed that they consider the disputed patents valuable enough to fight for, which supports our ownership claims." The legal chess match was accelerating beyond Joseph's ability to track individual moves. Motions and countermotions, discovery requests and protective orders, depositions and expert witness preparations. The machinery of high-stakes litigation consumed everything in its path. Joseph found himself simultaneously plaintiff and defendant, aggressor and victim, David and Goliath, depending on which narrative frame dominated the news cycle. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, Joseph's former MIT professor, reached out after seeing his story on LinkedIn. "I remember your thesis work on adaptive network protocols," she wrote. "You presented those algorithms 2 years before you joined Nexus Technologies. I still have your original research files if you need academic documentation of prior invention." Joseph stared at the email for 10 minutes before forwarding it to Patterson. Dr. Rodriguez's archives contained proof that Joseph had developed the foundational concepts for several disputed patents during his graduate studies, before he'd ever heard of Nexus Technologies. The patents weren't just improperly assigned, they represented continuation of work that predated his employment entirely. As Joseph prepared for what would become the most important phone call of his legal battle, Emma squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens," she said, "you're fighting for something bigger than money or revenge. You're fighting for the principle that creativity has value, that innovation deserves recognition, that people matter more than quarterly profits." Joseph dialed Patterson's number, ready to share the evidence that would transform his defensive legal position into an unstoppable offensive campaign. Nexus Technologies was about to discover that some engineers never stop innovating, including ways to seek justice. The settlement conference took place on a rain-soaked Thursday morning in Patterson's conference room, 37 floors above San Francisco's financial district. Joseph sat across from 5 Nexus representatives, including CEO David Morrison and General Counsel General Marcus Chen, the same executives who'd authorized his termination 6 weeks earlier. The irony of the reversal wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Morrison looked haggard, his usually immaculate appearance showing the strain of 6 weeks defending against patent challenges that had frozen his company's operations. Samsung had suspended their licensing payments pending resolution of the ownership disputes. Apple had threatened to terminate their supply agreements unless Nexus could provide clear title to the disputed intellectual property. The company's valuation had dropped from $4.8 billion to $1.2 billion as investors fled the uncertainty. "Mr. Stewart," Morrison began, his voice carrying none of the corporate confidence Joseph remembered from company meetings, "I want to start by acknowledging that mistakes were made in how we handled your departure. The timing was unfortunate, and the process could have been more respectful of your contributions to our success." Patterson sloped. Patterson interrupted smoothly. "My client isn't interested in apologies, Mr. Morrison. He's interested in resolutions that reflect the actual value of his intellectual property contributions." She slid a settlement proposal across the table, a document that had required 3 revisions as Joseph's legal position strengthened with each new piece of evidence. The numbers were staggering. Joseph sought recognition as co-inventor on 14 patents, retroactive royalty payments totaling $12.7 million, and ongoing licensing fees representing 40% of future revenue from the disputed technologies. Additionally, he demanded public acknowledgement of his contributions and implementation of intellectual property protocols that would prevent similar violations against other engineers. Chen reviewed the proposal with the careful attention of someone defusing a bomb. These terms would essentially make Mr. Stewart a major shareholder in technologies that were developed using company resources, company time, and company facilities, he observed. His legal training was showing, looking for negotiation angles even in a hopeless situation. "Technologies that were never legally assigned to your company," Patterson replied evenly. "Mr. Stewart's graduate work at MIT predates his employment with Nexus by 2 years. Dr. Rodriguez's archives prove that the foundational algorithms were developed before your company existed. You've been profiting from intellectual property you never owned." Joseph watched the exchange with detached fascination, observing corporate structures collapse under the weight of legal reality. These were the same executives who treated him as disposable, who'd calculated that firing him 72 hours early would save them $88,000 in bonus payments. Now they were facing potential damages that exceeded their company's remaining market value. The turning point came when Morrison's phone buzzed with an emergency text. His expression darkened as he read the message, then showed it to Chen. "Samsung has just terminated our licensing agreement," Morrison announced to the room. "They're demanding a refund of all royalty payments pending resolution of this dispute." The silence stretched for nearly a minute as both sides absorbed the implications. Samsung's licensing deal represented 63% of Nexus's revenue. Without it, the company couldn't meet payroll beyond the current month. Joseph's legal challenge had evolved from a personal grievance into an existential threat to Nexus's survival. Emma squeezed Joseph's hand under the table, a gesture that grounded him in the human reality beneath the legal maneuvering. He thought about Lisa Chen's phone call, about the 847 employees whose livelihoods depended on resolving the dispute. Justice was important, but destroying innocent lives in pursuit of principle felt increasingly hollow. "I have a counter-proposal," Joseph said, speaking directly for the first time since the meeting began. All eyes turned to him as he outlined terms that had crystallized during sleepless nights of moral wrestling. "I want recognition as co-inventor on the disputed patents. I want the $88,000 bonus that was rightfully mine. And I want Nexus to establish an innovation fund that ensures engineers receive meaningful equity participation in the intellectual property they create." Morrison and Chen exchanged glances, recognizing that Joseph's modified terms were far more reasonable than Patterson's original proposal. "The innovation fund is an interesting concept," Morrison admitted, "but equity participation for all engineering contributions could fundamentally alter our business model." "Your business model was built on theft," Joseph replied bluntly. "Maybe it needs fundamental alteration." The words carried the accumulated frustration of 5 years watching his innovations generate billions in profit while he received standard salary increases and token recognition. The final settlement was hammered out over 3 more hours of negotiation, with breaks for private consultation and several tense moments when talks nearly collapsed. Joseph would receive co-inventor recognition on 11 patents, the $88,000 bonus plus interest, and $2.8 million in retroactive royalty payments. More significantly, Nexus would establish a $50 million innovation fund providing equity stakes to engineers whose patents generated significant revenue. As the documents were signed, Morrison approached Joseph privately. "I want you to know that your termination wasn't personal. It was a financial decision made during budget constraints. But you're right that we lost sight of valuing the people who drive our success." Joseph studied the man who'd authorized his professional destruction, searching for sincerity beneath corporate platitudes. The damage was personal, even if the decision wasn't. Every engineer who creates something valuable deserves to share in that value's realization. That's not radical thinking, it's basic human dignity. 3 months later, Joseph received an envelope containing his settlement check and a handwritten note from Dr. Rodriguez congratulating him on defending intellectual property rights for the entire engineering community. The money was life-changing, but the recognition meant more: validation that creativity and innovation deserved protection from corporate indifference. Emma wore the Cartier ring to their engagement celebration, held at the same restaurant where Joseph had planned to propose before his termination. "To fighting for what's right," she toasted, raising her glass to the man who'd learned that sometimes the most important battles are won not through surrender, but through the patient application of justice. The Nexus Innovation Fund disbursed its first equity payments 6 months later, transforming 847 employees from wage earners into stakeholders in their own creativity. Joseph's battle had rippled far beyond personal vindication, establishing precedent that would protect engineers across Silicon Valley from corporate intellectual property theft. In the end, Joseph Stewart discovered that the most elegant solution to complex problems wasn't always technical. Sometimes it was simply refusing to accept that people are disposable, that innovation has no intrinsic value, or that power structures are immune to the fundamental principles of fairness and recognition. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon.